Welcome to the DSEF. The Direct Selling Executives Forum was created to be a place where real direct selling executives and vendors in the space can come out and share solutions to challenges that face us all in the marketplace. Our guest today is going to be unpacking a topic and sharing their raw thoughts for you to learn from. All right, let's go meet our guest. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Direct Selling Executives Forum's open forum on thriving in Canada. I'm so excited for Omar to bring out our guest today because we have literally one of my favorite proponents of Canada and direct sales is Peter Maddox, who runs the Direct Selling Canada. And for those of you who haven't had the chance to meet Peter, and Peter does such a good job, for those of you that are watching from the States, of coming to U.S. events. One of the things that I'm always amazed is how many times he's at all of our U.S. events all the time. You do a very good job of being in the community there. Peter, I'm going to read you a bit of his background, and then we'll jump in and actually start the show today. So Peter has served as the president of DSA Canada since 2018. As president, he's passionate about promoting and growing positive impact that direct selling has on Canadian individuals and communities, as well as ensuring the association remains as influential representative of its member companies. His role at DSA Canada involves managing files as diverse and strategic planning, government relations, regulatory affairs, media relations, member engagement, and being a public face of the organization. He has an extensive experience with associations and marketing roles, previously held positions at the Canadian Propane Association and Canadian Tire Corporation, originally from Australia, which you hear a little bit today, or we should say Tasmania, right? Peter has worked for both the Australian Professional Engineers Association, now Professionals Australia, Australian Pharmacy Guild, has an MBA from Chifley Business School and marketing degree from University of Tasmania, and is currently studying to become a certified association executive. Peter, thank you so much for joining us here today. Incredible bio, and we'll just love the experience you brought to everything that you do. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to a discussion today.
Yeah, it's going to be good. So with that, Omar, let's go ahead and kick off the show and let's walk through thriving in Canada.
Thank you, Ben, and good morning, Peter. Well,
Good morning.
as chair of the DSA and president, sir, you have acted as a guide for many in the space. For those that do not know your story, why did you choose to serve today in the DSA?
Yeah, so kind of like a lot of people's careers, they happen a little bit by accident, but I find myself here today and super excited about it. So I am the president of DSA Canada. I think there's a point in your career where you go, I guess this is what I do now. And for me, like a few years ago, I was like, I'd worked in a number of associations and I was like, I guess I'm an association guy now. And so that came to me, and very passionate about that space, and very fortunate to have found an industry with an association that I'm also passionate about, being the Direct Sellers Association here in Canada. So yeah, I came up through marketing, worked in some sales roles as a younger man, noticeably in Australia, obviously. Tasmania, a state of Australia, but we kind of consider ourselves a little bit different. And in around 2007, I moved to Canada, having met a wonderful Canadian lady. And when you move countries, sometimes you take a step sideways or backwards a little bit. So it was a good opportunity for me to think about, what I wanted to do with my career. I'm very lucky to have found the Direct Sellers Association. And I was really drawn to the stories of the industry and to the people in the industry. It's a pretty unique industry and pretty amazing people. And, this industry has some myths and misconceptions about it. So I didn't know a lot, but I came in with a few of those as well, which were, some of them are earned, but most of them have been made up by someone who doesn't have the industry's best interests at heart. And so, yeah, certainly as I got to know the people in the industry and the stories, I really found a passion for it as well. So around 6.5 years in this role right now. I did come in with, so I'm an association manager. I didn't really know a lot about direct selling. So I think I sell that as a positive, that I came into the industry with fresh eyes and being able to just question things and say, why do we do this? And, does this make sense? So I think that's been an advantage for me. 6.5 years, maybe I'm an insider now, which has its positives and negatives. I think the other thing I love about the industry is just, obviously there's challenges and every day is different. And so we're, whether it's regulatory and government relations work, or it's working with the public perception of the industry, or helping member companies or potential member companies in Canada. So yeah, obviously most associations exist because there's issues, right? If there were no issues, you wouldn't need an association to represent the people involved. So we're constantly seeking out those issues and looking to fix them. And I really like associations because it's about bringing people together who may be competitors in their regular life, but coming together and really working on files that kind of grow the pie for everybody rather than scrambling around fighting for the pie that exists. If we can make direct selling a more, easy to get into industry and an easy to understand industry, I think, the sky's the limit as it continues to evolve and change.
I just love the approach you've taken and even the attitude of listening while at the same time advocating. And it's been really helpful. And so when we came to this topic today of thriving in Canada, it was just nobody better. So thank you so much for being here today, Peter. Well, let's jump right into the questions coming from the forum. Back to you, Omar.
Thank you. Yes. Well, speaking about misconceptions, there have been many misconceptions of companies that open up the Canadian market. If you could give a framework for executives to follow that want to thrive in Canada, what would that framework would look like?
Yeah, there are definitely challenges in the direct selling space. There are challenges in Canada generally, and then there are challenges that relate to both direct selling and Canada together. So, I mean, I think one of the mistakes a lot of companies make when they come to Canada is they don't naturalize or Canadianize a lot of the stuff they do. So let's say it's a company coming from the US, they continue to use US marketing and US products and all those sorts of things, and they sometimes struggle with that. So I think I would say that being present in Canada is in the sort of both the physical sense, but also the spiritual sense is super important for a company to be successful in Canada. So that means, potentially having staff on the ground here, or if not on the ground here, then staff who are visiting very regularly, talking to consumers, talking to both current independent consultants and potential independent consultants, doing products that are specific to the Canadian market. Sometimes they'll have to do that anyway, just because of regulatory stuff. Obviously, what you can say about products is different in different countries. Obviously, we have two official languages here in Canada as well, French and English. So that's something that's much easier to understand how to deal with that if you have your finger on the pulse here in Canada. So I think it's super important to be present here. And Canadians will sniff if you're not legitimately committed to the Canadian market. So, if a company sort of pretends they're Canadianizing things but really doesn't, people aren't going to sign up to become a consultant for you. They're not going to buy your products because they want a company that's going to be around in Canada for a long time and is committed to being here. So, and we say it all the time, but we're not the 51st state. So it's important for companies to recognize that. And for financial reasons in particular, a lot of companies now who used to have maybe a Canadian head office are running Canada out of, let's say, Salt Lake City or Dallas or somewhere like that.
Sure.
Which is okay, but it's still, you still need to have, some sort of connection. And that's obviously somewhere that DSA come in. We sort of, one of the ways we market ourselves is we can be your eyes and ears on the ground in Canada and make sure that you're aware of all the things that are happening and help you to work through them. I mean, secondly, in order to thrive in Canada, you need to follow the rules. Canada is a fairly highly regulated market in terms of direct selling. Within the Competition Act, which is sort of our business sort of oversight act here in Canada, there's a specific section relating to multi-level marketing and how they're differentiated, how legal multi-level marketing is differentiated from illegal pyramid schemes. So it's important to be on top of that and to get everything pre-planned before you enter the market. And that can have real advantages in that you can get some of your business documents approved by the Competition Bureau who oversee that act. And then they can, then you've got certainty going forward that what you're doing is legal in Canada, which in the US, for instance, is difficult. The FTC doesn't sign off saying this is good or bad. They just sometimes will sort of leave you in the dark and you kind of scramble around hoping you're doing the right thing. So I think that's a real advantage in Canada. The other regulatory thing, and we can talk about that a little more as we move on, is in terms of products and making sure that you meet product requirements here. But I would say, look, a lot of companies there's a lot of Canadian direct selling companies. A lot of companies have come to Canada, whether it's from the US or Europe or Asia, as direct selling companies. So everything's been done before, everything's been experienced before. So whether it's through a forum like the DSA or, through contacts in the industry, it's really important to reach out to other companies that are already in this space and learn from them. I've found that direct selling companies are super sharing. They want the industry to succeed and they want companies that are entering the market to do the right thing, because it only takes one company to do the wrong thing and we kind of all look bad. So our members in particular, but the direct selling community in general, is very supportive of helping companies that want to launch in Canada. And I think finally, speaking about partnerships, there's a great community of suppliers, whether that's legal experts or, logistics experts or tech experts or those sorts of things who know the Canadian market really well as well. So, it's important to connect with them. And like I said, everything's been done before. So you don't need to start things from scratch. There's people out there who can help you. So utilize the community. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Utilize the community that exists for direct selling in Canada. And I think that's the first step in a company thriving here in this market.
And one of the things I've noticed about the way you set up DSA Canada too, I got a chance to become a member and come to your last event up at Niagara-on-the-Lake. And you have put the resources together for people who do want to open Canada well in one place, and it's been very accessible. And so I think that that's something to remember is you don't have to look far if you're like, how do we go win in Canada? I would plug in to what DSA Canada has to offer. Each DSA in different countries is different, right? At the end of the day, like we could spend a lot of time talking about the differences between resources in Europe versus USA versus we have a previous episode of the Direct Selling Executives Forum that is literally the episode before this one with Danny Lee, who's the chairman of DSA USA, right? They're a very different proponent of what they're doing with companies versus what Peter is doing here in Canada. I would agree from just listening to all the Canadian counterparts that were serving for US owned companies. And then there was even some very interesting Canadian owned companies that have sold into the US that I met one of your speakers. We had them from Sapology on, versus the opposite, right? It's a Canadian companies expanding in the US. What Peter just outlined of saying, hey, this is regulatory, it's heavy, right? This is not a easy lift on the regulatory registration requirements side for physical products, for registrations, for approvals. It's not China, okay? It's not that hard. This isn't 2 years of approvals and millions of dollars of paperwork like China is, as I know we've explored that here on our panels. But at the same time, it isn't the 51st state. And so one of the invitations that I think is important as we kind of walk through some of the pitfalls we've seen and just real stuff that's happened from some of these questions here today in the podcast is to know that there are resources available and there is a set track you can run on. And I was amazed at how open and friendly the people were, right, at the group. And it wasn't, just all close to my chest. There was people who were representing, organizations that are doing hundreds of millions of dollars a year who are literally saying, oh yeah, we're struggling with that too. Or, oh yeah, we actually are working through it this way. And I thought that was really special. So great job in just organizing that community, Peter. I think that's a real asset to anybody who's thinking through how they expand to Canada and first deciding, okay, we're gonna do it diligently and we're gonna do it properly. Back to you, Omar.
Thank you, Ben. Right. So I know you've discussed, beautifully explained the frameworks, but what pitfalls do we need to be aware of when doing business in Canada?
Yeah, great question. I think here's the reality. North America, in a lot of cases, is one big market. So, if something's happening in the US, it's often happening in Canada as well before a company even knows it's happening. So maybe someone lives in upstate New York and they have a friend in Ontario or Quebec and they say, hey, I've got these great products. So direct selling doesn't really recognize borders in that sense. So it can kind of happen sort of from a grassroots level before the company really recognizes it. What I would say is that before that grows too much and before you start paying out commissions in Canada, it's super important that you get, as Ben said, sort of all your ducks in a row, or make sure that you get organized and get all the right approvals, because it's far harder to do that once sort of the can of worms is open, I guess, and the business is thriving. And then if you go back in and say, hey, we want to get legit now, it can be quite difficult because the regulators will go, well, you've been operating here already and you haven't been doing the right thing. So we're going to make this really hard for you. So I would say that it does take a little bit of time, but if a company is sort of accidentally entering Canada or is thinking about getting into the Canadian market, that is the right time to start talking to people like us at the DSA, to legal counsel in Canada, to expert on getting products approved and those sorts of things, because it can be a little bit of a process. Honestly, I kind of joke that in the US, I could get an idea for a direct selling company in the morning and start selling the products in the afternoon and then roll from there. In Canada, it makes a lot more sense to really, maybe it takes 12 months or more to really get everything lined up and ready to launch, but that's going to put you in great shape to be successful in the longer term. And so that includes things like getting your compensation plan looked at by the government regulator to make sure it is a legitimate multi-level marketing compensation plan. And that's grandfathered in. So once you've got that, they can't come back to you and say, well, what you're doing is wrong. So that's really fantastic. On the product side, particularly for the dietary supplement products, which are called natural health products in Canada, just as a different terminology. There is a process as well in making sure the labeling and the claims and all those sort of things are approved. So it's important to get the ball rolling on that, because our bureaucrats aren't always as quick as we'd hope they'd be in a country that's trying to encourage business. So yeah, very important to get ahead of that. So I think some companies come in and thinking that is going to be easier than it is. Companies will also use like their own in-house, whether it's product experts or legal counsel, who have no experience with Canada, to try and work through some of those things. I would say there may be a cost involved, but it's far better to get some Canadian experts involved at that point as well. The other main pitfall I'd talk about, and it sort of relates to the not the 51st state thing. Looking at Canada just as one market is also a failing point for a lot of companies. Canada's
very good note.
It's a huge country physically, but it's also a very culturally diverse country. Obviously, like I mentioned, we have French as an official language of Canada, mainly in the province of Quebec, where it's the language of choice for a majority of the population. And there are certainly regulations there in terms of how you name products and how you sell products and those sorts of things. But I think where a lot of our member companies have found success is seeking out niche markets within the Canadian market to really drive themselves forward. So a company like New Skin or USANA, they've done amazingly well in the Chinese Canadian market, so particularly on the West Coast in Vancouver, but in Toronto and other markets as well. So that they purposely sought out leaders in that cultural group. And from there, they've had an amazing amount of success. We've got other companies who do, like I mentioned, they do really well in Quebec because they've got all their translations done perfectly. They have customer service in Quebec French, all those sorts of things. So they do really well there. It gets really niche. Like I think Monate, one of our member companies, they've done really well in the Latin American community because they found a couple of leaders in that immigrant community and have done really well. A couple of other companies, like we have Amish and Mennonite communities in Canada. A couple of companies have done really well in those communities. So that's getting super niche, but I think to look at Canada and go, we're going to one size fits all for this enormous country is a mistake. It's a starting point, but from there, it really makes sense to focus on whether it's language groups or cultural groups or religious groups or geographic groups or whatever it is. And that's where most companies then sort of go from, hey, we're doing okay in Canada to, we're doing a fantastic job. So I think if companies can recognize that, then it gets rid of some of the pitfalls of sort of, our sales are flat, we're not really taking off anywhere, is to find those strong leaders in those community groups and really go from there. And that's not really a Canadian only
it's
answer.
wisdom,
that's a
Peter.
global
That's so
answer.
good. That's so good though. Like, because we do get lazy as executives and we think like, a buyer's a buyer. And what you just unpacked is like something, I mean, if you're not expanding to Canada and you're checking out the podcast today, you can apply that. I mean, that the way you segment and the way you reach out relevantly to different audiences is everything. And Peter's right on with that. One note, Peter, that I think is also, is you talk about the natural health products too, right below, is we have to realize that labels and what you can say are, of course, different in every country. And there can be some advantages in that process too. I know it's a pitfall for most, but can be advantages too. My favorite label story of all time was me leaving an airport in the Philippines. I had a massive table, right? As a to go outside the restaurants, Peter, and it had big bags of turmeric, just what we all cook with in our homes, and a massive banner that says, heals heart disease. And it was just this massive banner that says, heal heart disease, eat turmeric, right? It was the ad. And evidently in the Philippines, it's compliant to claim that you can heal heart disease with turmeric. But it was just a funny example of how our roles in natural health products, gang, to recognize, just like Peter's talking about, are really different in each country. They just are. And some of you think, oh yeah, we're just going to get in as cheap as we can to kind of test, the market and test the demand. And it's okay to work with some Canadians that have friends or family members in the US that are buying in the US and experiencing products in the US to see if these folks, want to promote you. But then realize that if you have physical goods, it's going to take a real investment to do Canada well. And I loved what you said about the segmentation. Those relationships in those inner communities are everything inside of the space. And so even as you're looking at opening up a new market, Canada or somewhere else, you have to do the work of the research of figuring out what are the niche communities that people have a circle of influence in. And because sometimes you run across these leaders, and Peter, I know you've seen this too, where the kind of the least likely is the most likely, right? Some of these leaders where you're like, how in the world did that person bring? How many people? And we've kind of all run into that in direct sales. And it's because they were a person of influence in some sub community that we didn't even know what it was. I've seen that from clients selling energy drinks to gamers, as a subculture, to I could go across to I have an insurance client who has every single person is Filipino, even though they're in California in the whole company. And you see that across different niches. And so there's some real truth to that. So I love that you shared that.
And
Mac,
just to add to that,
yeah,
if I may,
yeah,
I mean, for US companies, Canada is a really, if they're looking at global expansion, Canada is a really good starting point. They come to Canada, and Canada is this country that's kind of regulatory wise sort of stuck somewhere
yeah,
between the US and Europe. So if a US
sure.
company comes to Canada, it gives them a first taste of what it might be like. And we sort of say, if you can be compliant in Canada and you can meet all our needs, you can basically go anywhere in the world. Whether, Australia has
Yeah,
very strict product regulatory regime as well. But if you've done it in Canada, that's a really good head start. In a similar vein, we have European companies coming to Canada as a first stepping stone into North America and the Americas in general, because they see some of the regulatory stuff and some of the cultural stuff in Canada as being relatable to the European market. So they come here first and then jump into North America and then perhaps Latin America as well. So it's a really great sort of test market for companies who are looking to go outside of their comfort zone as well.
Wow, great insights. Thank you.
good.
For those that have not yet explored becoming members of DSA in Canada, what does it take to join the club?
Yeah, so I guess we are a club. We do have high standards, so we don't just let anybody in. Obviously, when a company's interested in joining, and there's obviously a whole range of different reasons for that, which I can go into in a minute, but we would do something similar to what a government regulator would do. We look at all their marketing materials, we look at their compensation plan, we look at their social media accounts, just to make
Yeah,
sure that we have a code of ethics. And so we make sure that they're meeting the minimum standards we would expect at our code of ethics, which obviously starts with the laws of the land. So are they in compliance with the laws of the land? But above that, do they make efforts to sort of do good training and educate their field on what is right and wrong? So we go through that process with them. Now, having said that, not every company is perfect when they come to us, but we don't just say, well, you're not perfect, we're going to turn you away. We say, hey, you're not perfect. Let's help you get to that point where we see you as being someone we would love to have as a member. So I feel like we're better to sort of outreach to companies that are trying their best to be compliant rather than turning them away. And that sort of, the more companies that are aware of our code of ethics and involved with it, I think that's better for the industry, because we don't want companies out there that are doing the wrong thing and bringing bad vibes across all of us. So yeah, I mean, obviously we love to grow our membership, but in a managed way, so that we ensure that we have the right companies involved. On the flip side of that, we also have supplier memberships. So we have a pretty select band of companies that provide services and products to direct selling industry. And as Ben saw at our conference, we really involve them in our discussions as well, because I see those guys as being experts on all different aspects of the direct selling industry. So I think that's really important.
Yeah.
Now, once you join, we have, bless them, we have these, it's a little bit like gyms. We have people who join, pay their money and never come to any events and never get involved in stuff. It's kind of nice to have, but it's better if you have people, you get out of an association like the DSA, you get out of it what you put into it. So if you sit on boards and committees and you come to events and you participate in surveys and all those sorts of things, you're going to get a lot more value from it. So we do advocacy events every year. We do our conference, and then we do other in-person and virtual events. So we love to get companies involved in that. I think one of the huge advantages companies get from direct selling, and we've already talked about this quite a lot, is just the sharing and the networking and sitting. It's the discussions in a session at our conferences are great, but just as valuable are discussions at 11:30 at night, sitting on a bar stool talking to someone about what's happening in the industry. So I think that's incredibly important. A couple of other things we do an awards program every year, both for our corporate member companies, but also for the independent sales consultants. So coming up in September, we have what we call Direct Sellers Day, which is an annual celebration of direct selling. And we give out awards to independent sellers from across our member companies. We also do a scholarship program for people who are involved either themselves in the direct selling space or their parents or grandparents are involved. And we've just in the process of announcing the winners of that for this year. So,
Nice.
but I mean, I think every company joins a DSA, our DSA, for a different reason. I think at the end of the day, it seems right now companies are trying to do things on their own, but now more than ever, there's a need for the direct selling industry to get together and to talk about our issues. And that's exactly what the DSA is set up to do. So I would say, you know, if your company's thought about being a member of the DSA, then now's the time to have that discussion. We're not scary. I'm not scary. Happy to chat with anyone and see where they're at and offer some advice. And then, but yeah, I think there's never, you know, there's a lot of flux in the industry right now. So I think it's even more important that we have these shared spaces where we can talk about what are our challenges, what are our opportunities, and how do we collectively as a group move forward with them. So we're an exclusive club, but we're not a scary club that, you know, just for cool kids, we're for all sorts of kids who want to do the right thing.
I experienced that firsthand too. I saw that in our time together. And so I love the approach and just the way we're serving people. And I do believe it's valuable. And that's why we're so grateful to have you here on the show today for those that are looking into it. So thank you for your time. I know we're coming to time today. We have one last question, just a quick one.
Yep.
But I'm going to pass back to Omar for our final question of the day. So Omar, we'll go ahead and we'll grab our last one from the forum.
Yeah, this is my favorite one. For those busy executives, you know, that feel overwhelmed, if you could leave them with one thought from our time together for them to take action on, what would that be?
And Peter, I'll tell you the crazy frame of these guys. This is the person you know who's like, I already got my objectives for the next 2 years. All right, I can't add a thing to my plate, but they still dialed in and listened today. So what would you share with that person? You know, the one I'm talking to, they're just buried. What would you say with that one?
Yeah, I would say if you're buried, it's great to share that being buried with others. So talk to people, listen to people, try to have conversations, whether it's your competitors within the industry or, you know, more broadly in retail or something like that. Talk with your independent sellers, talk with consumers, talk with the DSA, talk with government. Like just having those conversations can, sometimes I joke that a problem shared is a problem two people have got, but the actual saying is a problem shared is the problem halved. So, you know, just talking about those issues and hearing what other people are feeling and getting a sense that you're not alone in this, I think is not just in the direct selling space, but in any job or any area where you're under pressure, it can be an amazing relief. So I would say, yeah, for me, it's just talk and listen and be open to learning new things. I think that's super important as a human being at the end of the day.
Amen. That's a good word, Peter. And Omar, I want to thank you so much for hosting today, Peter. Total treat to have you out. For those of you that are new to the Direct Selling Executives Forum, if you're watching on Spotify or YouTube or you're on our streams on LinkedIn, it is free to be a member of the Direct Selling Executives Forum. You just go on LinkedIn or go to www.directsellingexecutivesforum.com and you'll be forwarded to apply as a executive to join. It's absolutely free. And you'll be able to submit questions for future panels to hear answers, just like the ones you heard today. And it was just a total gift to have you out here today, Peter. Look forward to seeing you at future DSA Canada events and USA events. And I'm just grateful for all the work you're doing in this space. Thank you for your time today. We appreciate you. Everyone else, have an amazing day.
To have you today.
Let's go apply it. All right. Thank you so much. We'll see you then.
Thanks, guys.
Bye for now.
See ya. Bye.
If you haven't yet joined the DSEF group on LinkedIn, go to directsellingexecutiveforum.com or go on LinkedIn and search for Direct Selling Executive Forum to apply. The group is free and is an invite-only community of direct selling executives by direct selling executives.